Hi, I am Jack Brewer with Expanding Frontiers Research, and welcome to the third meeting of the Wayward Sons Book Group. I have an interesting and entertaining, knowledgeable group with me tonight. I'm glad all of you are here. Thank you. When we met last, we started on chapter 3, the NICAP story, and we were exploring how NICAP was perpetually reporting financial challenges as well as having an inability to get its mailers and journals and updates out on time. And we are going to continue reading at that point and take turns reading and look at some slides and do some discussing. Who'd like to start reading for us tonight? How about you, Rachel? Will you read for us?
Sure. Where are we
Thank
starting?
you.
Okay, so this was a chronic shortcoming, happening pretty much from the outset. It was particularly problematic because the print material was the lifeline of NICAP. It was the benefit of being a subscriber and apparently a primary revenue source. Newsletters and similar literature were how NICAP briefed its following on the perceived escalating flying saucer mystery and any progress it believed it was making toward solving it. Veteran researcher Barry Greenwood got involved with NICAP in what would turn out to be the organization's latter stages. He suggested in a 2020 email to me that he thought NICAP did not do a good job of delegating, which resulted in personnel ineffectively trying to handle too many responsibilities. Research and administration should be entirely separate in an organization, Greenwood wrote. Researchers shouldn't be handling funds and keeping track of membership matters. This takes time away from research. And administrators shouldn't be doing research while managing the business at the same time. Due diligence isn't being done for research while one is being distracted by business issues. Financial shortcomings and related challenges aside, among the most justifiable criticism of NICAP was the group expressed a commitment to objectively follow evidence, yet was unable to consistently and uniformly keep that commitment. Kehoe and NICAP portrayed a scientific approach, yet were prone to subscribing to premature conclusions. Proclamations of using serious research protocols, while accurate at times, in other instances seemed to be somewhat of a public relations facade. Intentionally or not, the stance served to garner credibility while shielding NICAP from accountability for its bias. NICAP leaders and members often seemed completely convinced their beliefs would prove correct if they could only persuade certain agencies to release their files. Unfortunately, we may sometimes be wrong that our beliefs are necessarily facts under such conditions. A big part of the NICAP effort involved coaxing scientists, military officers, pilots, and similar figures to get on the bandwagon. NICAP enjoyed success at attracting respected professionals, but an abundance of such support could ultimately not overcompensate for the fact the endorsements in many instances represented an ever-growing collection of stated opinions, suspicions, and beliefs, not established facts. In their defense, NICAP and its supporters did not have the luxury of hindsight that researchers enjoy today. Even still, many of the lessons of the previous 70 years remain widely ignored and only selectively cited in today's body of UFO research. The praise many feel NICAP deserves, in addition to its general operating model and, ironically, just like the criticism often aimed at the organization, is also due to the activities of the Kehoe crew. They collectively ran the group from 1957 through 1969. It was during those years that NICAP expanded its membership to 14,000, The UFO evidence was compiled and published, and the infamous Michigan flap and swamp gas story unfolded and was investigated, among other events of interest. It was also under Kehoe's direction NICAP was credited with contributing to motivating the Air Force to fund the University of Colorado UFO Project, a 1966 to 1968 official study of the saucer situation. However, the study became known as the infamous Condon Report, containing a damaging assessment for UFO enthusiasts due to its minimization of reported UFO activity. The motives behind the project and the validity of its resulting report were adamantly challenged by NICAP. The Kehoe crew was essentially disbanded within a year of the Condon Report. What remained of the committee by the 1980s, which pretty much amounted to little more than its files and mailing list, was absorbed into J. Allen Hynek's Center for UFO Studies, or CUFOS. Much of the NICAP previous personnel and investigative networks were long gone. The group's 1960s state of field investigations, public appearances, and formidable reputation, at least among saucer enthusiasts, were mere memories. Okay, I'm going to stop there if someone wants to continue.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Who else would like to read? I was going to have you go, whoever would like to read, about 5 more paragraphs, and then I thought we would do some discussion.
Accusations of CIA infiltration were widespread. Many believed NICAP was sabotaged by the intelligence community, an intentional derailment in order to cease its investigations and halt its campaign to expose a UFO cover-up perpetuated by the CIA and Air Force. The late researcher and FOIA activist Todd Zechel was among the more adamant accusers. He expressed his perspectives widely, including in an article he penned for the previously referenced 1978 bulletin published by Ground Saucer Watch, GSW. The article provides a working summary of what many feared and believed took place, and serves as a basic model of what much of the UFO genre generally thinks happened to NICAP. Zechel wrote how NICAP drew the attention of the CIA from the very beginning. He asserted that Bernard J.O. Carvalho and Nicholas de Roquefort, men on the inaugural 1956 NICAP team formed by T. Townsend Brown, were CIA assets. That may very well be correct, although their intentions are not nearly as clear as Zechel seemed to suppose. Carvalho's history is much less substantiated than Roquefort's, the latter of which was a psychological warfare expert at his day job and almost certainly a CIA man. Zechel, who according to the Washington Post was a former NSA employee himself, suggested the CIA was interested in keeping tabs on NICAP and gaining access to its unpublished files. Essentially, Zechel asserted the agency wanted access to unpublished UFO reports and identifying information therein about leakers who approached Kehoe and his staff in confidence. The CIA could have presumably then advised the Air Force of the situations and any leakers in its midst. The Air Force, Zechel continued in the GSW bulletin, could respond by transferring its personnel who were secretly providing information to NICAP, disrupt lines of communications, and similar actions in order to render NICAP ineffective.
Thank you, Allison. Let's pause there. What interested me about part of this, Zechel came up, right from the beginning in this story, and it was considered in the group that he was an unreliable narrator. And during that conversation, I mentioned that I had a memo released by the NSA in 2017 that was a 1978 memo, the same year that Zechel was writing this in the Ground Saucer Watch Bulletin. And this NSA memo was written by Tom Dooley, who was a member of the board of directors of the Mutual UFO Network, which is MUFON. And he worked for the NSA, and he was advising his supervisor. You may recall I mentioned about his attendance at the annual MUFON symposium in Ohio and some events that happened. These events included Todd Zechel approaching him, wanting information about UFOs that the NSA might be privy to. And another thing that happened was a group of researchers were doing presentations on and passing around documents that they claimed were CIA documents that represented crashed UFOs, crashed extraterrestrial spacecraft and their retrievals. Tom Dooley is informing his NSA supervisor in this memo that he had verified with the CIA that the documents were fraudulent and that they were being passed around at this conference. But there were some other things. I'm really just telling you that to give you the context of the 1978 NSA memo written by Tom Dooley, because there were some other things in it that I thought was interesting, and I'll share those here. This is from that 1978 NSA memo, and Dooley is informing his supervisor that on 27 August, Zechel called him and he wanted to clear up the matter of his working for NSA. That was because Dooley, being employed with NSA, knew that there were no records reflecting that Zechel had ever worked with the NSA, even though it was being carried in mainstream newspapers and whatnot. According to Dooley here, Zechel's version of the story was it just was a mix-up because Zechel had worked in the 60s for the Army Security Agency as a shift supervisor in Korea. So that's one thing that Dooley's basically saying. The guy has a story about how everybody's saying he worked for NSA, but he seems to be the one kind of pushing the story too. Another aspect of that memo that I found interesting was here. Dooley tells his supervisor that Zechel is requesting information from him. In fact, that was the name of the information. The name of the memo was an information solicitation. And Dooley tells his supervisor that he's checked on Zechel's character with people that know him closely. And there's some thought that he could be behind the CIA letter fraud that I described moments ago. And Dooley describes Zechel as apt to go to most any length to collect information or to bend facts to fit his needs, which makes the next thing Dooley informs his supervisor all the more interesting to me. That he spent about an hour on the phone with Zechel and talked to him, and says, without specific examples of his being dishonest, I should give him a chance of building a productive working relationship. I'm not sure what that's supposed to mean from an NSA perspective, especially in the context of he is describing the man as an unreliable UFO person. So, any thoughts or comments? Sure, Allison.
So I guess I would wonder, well, so Zechel was obviously trying to be someone in the community and that he had legitimacy. But what were his motives? And is it possible, I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to bring up this word, that they used him for controlled opposition at some point?
I think that's a reasonable theory. It's certainly a reasonable suspicion. I feel like we have documentation here that an NSA assignee, Dooley, was reporting on interactions with UFO people, and that he thought there was an opportunity for a productive working relationship. We don't know what that means, but I do feel like that's the documented fact. And like that establishes official NSA interest, you know, like that's more than like, I think I mentioned a couple weeks ago, I don't think Dooley would say that about his UFO hobby. You know, like if you were at a car show, you wouldn't tell your NSA boss, I think I might can trade some carburetors with them and have a good working relationship,
Right.
you know. But you guys' thoughts are welcome. I mean,
this is sort of a question going back a little bit. Does Zechel say what his source of the information is for his writing in Ground Saucer Watch? Or is it implicitly like his NSA connection?
that's a really good question. And what I found from reading some of these people's narrations, as well as receiving them, they often seem to struggle with separating their interpretations from what they can document, you know? And we don't know when that's intentional. We don't know when it's just simple confirmation bias. But I think that's a fair observation that Zechel takes this authoritative tone, like I'm giving it to you straight. Here's the lowdown. And that tone doesn't in itself make it accurate, you know? And I interacted with some people that took that tone that could not demonstrate to me why their narrative was more accurate than someone's narrative that contradicted their narrative, you know? And James Carrion, I consider somewhat of a mentor and a good example at this kind of research, that he calls himself that he says he does forensic historic research. And I found that when you look at the documents and like you try to forget all the noise and all the chatter and you just look at the documents, you just get a different narrative altogether than what all of these people are saying and doing. And yeah, I wanted to bring that Dooley memo back up because, yeah, he's outright saying that Zechel and Stringfield and the boys are passing around fraudulent documents at a MUFON conference. And, you know, those of you that are into the inside baseball know that 1978 was right on the doorstep of the whole Bill Moore, Benowitz, Simone Mendez, like a lot of fraudulent documents got passed around in that era. And they seem to identify friend from foe simply by whether you were waving a UFO flag or not, you know? How about you, Jeff? I know you're familiar with these circumstances.
Well, I was just gonna mention, yeah, like Ted Zechel, sometimes he used a pseudonym as well. He didn't always publish UFO stuff in his own name. He used the name Ted Zachary was one he used to use, like in the Saga UFO report in the 70s and stuff. And my experience with his involvement in cases that I've heavily investigated, such as this alleged story that Wilbert Smith told of a jet shooting a piece of a UFO debris off in like July 1952, and the CIA officer named Alvin Moore, finding this piece and promoting it. And this piece, supposedly, he wrote an article about the piece going missing out of the CIA, lockbox in Alvin Moore's office or some nonsense like that. And he either just outright makes up a bunch of details that aren't part of the story, or he got them from God knows where. Like he was also heavily involved with helping spread the Del Rio crash hoax story that changed multiple times like over the years. So he's an interesting character, but sort of an unreliable narrator at times. So like I would verify anything he says with other sources personally.
Sure, sure. And yeah, and I find it interesting that Dooley would report to his NSA supervisor that he's attempting to facilitate or construct a productive relationship with him. Controlled opposition comes to mind. Sowing disinformation, misinformation, trying to find leaks. I don't know, a number of things. Any other comments, or should we?
I was gonna say, I think the fact that Stringfield is involved too is worth noting, because it seems like he was probably, I mean, he's clearly passing off fake documents himself, but it seems like he was pretty well targeted or groomed as an asset of sorts in the early 70s, at least according to Valet's journals, which, that's another character you gotta you gotta look both ways before you cross the street, so to speak.
And I've mentioned before that this overlaps into our investigation at EFR of the New York Saucer Information Bureau. Yeah, Stringfield was a character in the FBI files when they were investigating contactees hanging out in Cincinnati, wanting to do public speaking and get funds. And the FBI expressed, my interpretation of the documents is the FBI was, one reason they were investigating it is they had informants coming to them telling them about it. Like it seemed to matter to the informants. And the FBI, I interpret, had interest in who's financing this, where's the money going, what's it for? Because it can be hard to express to people sometimes that are involved in the topic. And like if you get involved in it and all these alien hybrid stories and abductions and there's this and there's that, and you kind of know how it goes, you get kind of desensitized to it. But when a special agent with the FBI that's not steeped in UFO lore gets a memo across his desk that some guy's selling tickets at the local civic center or what have you to come hear about his interactions with extraterrestrials, someone not steeped in this lore would have a BS antenna go up and go, okay, I don't really care if his story is true or not, if there's no crime of fraud, but where's the money going? Like, who flew him here to do this? us, like and like those become the issues. And we're still digging into that about the New York Saucer Information Bureau. But yes, Tanner, indeed, Leonard Stringfield was among the people meeting and discussing the contactees, and never seemed to see a story he didn't want to believe. Yeah.
Kind of
Steve,
unrelated.
go ahead.
It's kind of unrelated, but one of my copies of Stringfield's crash retrieval reports is actually Tom Dooley's. Tom gave me a bunch of stuff several years ago, various old material, CUFOS journals, things like that he had mailed me.
Yeah, I think he contributed a significant amount of Tom Dooley contributed a significant amount of material to Smiles Lewis in Austin. Who would like to read next? We're starting at Townsend Brown was quickly relieved.
I'll volunteer to read.
Thank you, Randy.
Townsend Brown was quickly relieved of his leadership position due to his inability to make NICAP solvent, Zechel wrote. Before long, Kehoe got the nod, and Carvalho and Rockefort were soon gone due to what Zechel termed Kehoe cleaning house. This may be true enough, but is not easily verified, although we do not know that, for whatever reasons, Carvalho and Rockefort did in fact did not stick around after Brown's departure. Former Director of Central Intelligence, Admiral Roscoe H. Hillenkoetter, quite curiously served on the NICAP Board of Governors. This is widely accepted to have resulted from a pre-existing relationship with Major Kehoe. They were reportedly classmates at the Naval Academy. Hillenkoetter was the first director of the CIA, holding the position from 1947 to 1950. He sat on the NICAP board from 1957 to 1962. As suggested earlier, a number of prestigious and well-respected intelligence officers lent their names to NICAP, accepted advisory positions, and supplied the group with supportive statements. Their remarks were widely published in efforts to further legitimize both the organization and the UFO topic. The most effective means employed by the CIA to infiltrate, exploit, and ultimately sabotage NICAP, Zechel alleged, came in the form of Colonel Joseph Bryan III. Whether or not Zechel was entirely correct about the objectives of the colonel and the agency, Bryan is considered by many to weigh heavily in the NICAP story and was indeed a company man. He headed a psychological warfare division within the Office of Policy Coordination, a substantial CIA front. Please make a mental note of the Office of Policy Coordination, as we will be exploring it further. Numerous men of diverse talents and skills were employed in Bryan's division, including E. Howard Hunt of future Watergate infamy. Bryan reportedly worked with the CIA from approximately 1947 to 1953. He sat on the NICAP Board of Governors for substantial lengths of time both during and following the Kehoe years of 1957 to 1969. Zechel asserts that Bryan repeatedly tried to persuade Kehoe to reveal his most confidential reports and documents. Kehoe suspected ulterior motives, but Bryan provided a personal letter denouncing Air Force policies of UFO secrecy, along with permission to quote him. This, according to Zechel, won Kehoe's confidence and resulted in extending an invitation to Bryan to join the board. It should be noted there was apparently not a great deal known among UFO enthusiasts in the 1950s and 1960s about the likely CIA affiliations of Bryan, Roquefort, and Carvalho. We're still extracting that through the FOIA process, all of which might give us food for thought about when the public might realistically expect resolution to questions surrounding more recent intelligence professionals turned ufologists. It is also noteworthy that it was not unusual in my research to discover situations in which NICAP members and UFO researchers seemed to think motives could be discerned from the degree of belief or skepticism a person expressed about flying saucers. This became somewhat of a cultural staple in the genre. In essence, you were labeled a white hat if you were a believer, and a disinformation agent if you voiced disbelief or even reasonable skepticism. It seemed to escape many that their beliefs had not yet been established as facts, and very well should be challenged. Not to mention, motives and objectives might be more complex than those that hinged upon stated opinions about UFO riddles. Zechel asserted that Bryan betrayed Kehoe, penetrating NICAP for covert and subversive purposes. This purportedly put the agency in a position to effectively combat security leaks and block NICAP efforts in the process. Documents leaked to Kehoe by military officers sympathetic to the cause were allegedly discovered by Bryan and therefore compromised. In other words, Zechel wrote in the 1978 Ground Saucer Watch Bulletin, NICAP had no secrets. Mr. Zechel seems to have not found it important to note that, even if he were indeed correct, the CIA had designs on covertly monitoring NICAP channels and learning its secrets, the effort may have had nothing whatsoever to do with concerns about extraterrestrial space travelers and the cover-up thereof. Suffice to say, there are additional reasons intelligence agencies might take interest in military officers influenced to be sympathetic of an organization denouncing Air Force procedures to the point of leaking documents to its director. I'd venture to say those reasons make for much more likely scenarios of attracting official interest, particularly in this circumstance. Those scenarios do not, however, offer researchers the intoxicating satisfaction that comes with believing if they and their colleagues become subjects of interest to intelligence operatives, then they must be getting too close to the proverbial truth. In reality, it of course doesn't necessarily mean their assumptions about UFOs are correct at all. It might just indicate they have some misunderstandings about national security concerns they frame in support of their confirmation bias. That stated, I fully concede this is a complex chain of events spanning years and should not be oversimplified as a matter of convenience. I have become rather convinced, however, several possibilities seem more likely than Zechel's interpretation of the situation. The intelligence community, indeed, had interests in saucer groups, researchers, and NICAP. I just doubt it was for the reasons typically suspected.
Thank you, Randy. As I got more and more into this, I just found it interesting that it's taken as a given that things people see that they don't know what they are at least sometimes extraterrestrial spacecraft. Like that just is a given to a certain demographic. Like Zechel that's arguing against Colonel Bryan and various people. And I found it interesting that even if he's correct about that Bryan is claiming to be interested in saucers for nefarious reasons, I'm not sure how much I believe Zechel can't think of any reasons that might be other than to hide this extraterrestrial presence that, according to Zechel and his tribe, is surely a given. And in my opinion, Kehoe with NICAP, his lasting legacy, his most solid contribution to the genre may have been, I don't have to prove it because the CIA and Air Force has the proof but won't give it up. Like Like, why is it not Zechel's burden of proof that there's an extraterrestrial presence? Why is it if Joseph Bryan would just stop infiltrating NICAP, then there would be some disclosure? Like you following me that it's like just this circular, irrational thing that shirks the responsibility of just write a systematic paper of how you believe what you believe and how your research led you to this conclusion. Well, I can't because they're hiding it from me. And I think that may have been Kehoe's primary contribution, that maybe he didn't even think of it or do it first, but he sure used his PR skills to polish it some.
Yeah, I had kind of a similar thought a few pages ago where you talked about, if only they could persuade certain agencies to release their files, it would prove their beliefs. And I had just jotted down, like, it does seem like that's like an abdication of responsibility. Like, they just wanted to hit the easy button and have somebody else do all the work while they can just, shine a light on it and take all the glory, essentially.
Yeah, it gives them something to write about. Like they like I have argued in another book that the purpose of hypnosis as a memory retrieval tool was that it gave sensationalists otherwise non-existent evidence. And I feel like that is the CIA and Air Force and NSA is hiding it from us argument. Is that just, abdicates you of responsibility of forming a hypothesis, testing it, and reevaluating it after your test,
I think it also shows like a misunderstanding of like what the CIA and other agencies do. Not even in just that. I mean, maybe they have a UFO file, but I doubt it's at the top of their list. But I think it speaks volumes that directly after this call for them to release documents, at least some. Well, I mean, even in that NSA memo you talked about, they're calling for the release of all these documents, and the response is, okay, here's some fake documents, courtesy of whoever, and who knows who is sponsoring that at any point in time. But there's certain instances where it's almost certainly coming from someone knowledgeable enough to do so. Like like parts of the Majestic thing, like it was just reused actual documents. So I don't know. I think there's just like, I don't know, like people are prone to do this today even. Like the whole factions in the intelligence community are above humanity, and then there's the non-human intelligence and the angels, and yeah, I think that's kind of what that abdication is doing. It's saying, well, this is where I will get my argument from authority from, and I need nothing more than that.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing. Would you like to read some, Steve?
Sure, yeah, no problem. And sorry, I was having my own technical issues. I finally figured out that it was trying to connect to a remote speaker, but now I'm back and I'm here. But
no problem. Thank you.
Sure,
I have
and
one
just
more
to
comment right quick. Sorry.
Sure.
Before we start reading, I just wanted to say I like what you wrote about the you were essentially labeled a disinformation agent if you voice disbelief or even reasonable skepticism along those lines. And anyway, I like that. When I was in my like true believer days, I really like had no interest in um reading what the skeptics had to say, because to me it was so kind of obvious that that they were biased and would latch on to any excuse to dismiss the phenomenon. But what I've learned since then is like some of the skeptics really do some outstanding research, and in some cases is like far better research than the true believers have done. So that was just kind of an eye-opening experience.
I'm right there with you. I've experienced that too. When Tanner was talking about people can have uh, misunderstandings of what these agencies do, I wandered into a regional group one time that it was clear that they had all gotten the impression that NASA was a covert cover up agency and just kind of took it for granted. And that was one of the first times I ever heard that conspiracy. And I was like, wow, that's a new one. NASA, NASA's the men in black and running around kidnapping people and burning the evidence. And I was like, I don't think y'all know what NASA does, man. you know. Um, at any rate, yeah, the burden of proof is on the people spreading the conspiracy. Absolutely.
Yeah,
I think it's worth saying though. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Rachel.
I'm sure what you have to say is much smarter and more relevant.
No.
I really like that quote too, and something else I wanted to mention is that I kind of feel like Kehoe, he like reading his stuff and listening to him, reading his books, like he sounds like one of these UAP disclosure people from the contemporary era, but it's like, where is this coming from? Like, I can't think of anyone who has that very clear, like, disclosure oriented vision like that early on. Maybe I'm wrong or I'm missing someone, but he's very fervent and he has this very clear idea of of oh, that the military, the government, the Pentagon is hiding this stuff from us, and it's very clear that this is the real world, that there's like ET spacecraft visiting us and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I
Mm-hmm.
think it's bizarre. Uh, I think this might be pertaining to something later on in the chapter. I can't remember, but I was reading about his connection to balloons because he operated balloons. I don't know if that means he actually was flying in hot air balloons or he was operating like weather balloons. But I was reading about that a little bit, and to see like what he had to say about balloons. Maybe, because he and a lot of these other guys who were in the military during World War II were probably aware of the Japanese balloons. And there's a lot of similarities between the Fugo balloons and and like these later Phantom flying saucer and aircraft waves. Um, because like, well, anyway, I'll talk about that more later. But my main point is just that his stance, there was an article published by a guy named Erner Little from the Skyhook balloon, this cosmic ray study, and he was basically arguing that the flying saucers were largely actually Skyhook balloons. And and I found like that Kehoe was like responded to this and he was just like, that's totally wrong. There's no way that like, and I mean, Liddell's argument, I think, is a little bit too like, yeah, it couldn't be that like all of the sightings are caused by balloons, and even he says that in a later article, which Jeff Knox posted on Twitter, and but yeah, Kehoe is just completely, he just rejects that, and he's just like, only 10% of sightings are balloons, and we knew about those balloons even though they were not actually public information, but like and he makes this very strong statement against balloons. It was very, very interesting to me.
He does Kehoe gets into areas that I mean, sometimes we suspect conspiracies because it's difficult to believe people are as oblivious as they pretend to be. And Kehoe was that way at times, that like it's bad enough if just John Q. Public does it, but this was a major with experience flying military aircraft that was with a straight face proposing to the Air Force and CIA that he had the ability to sort out what's a UFO case that needs to be declassified compared to properly classified information that's going to have sensitive information about radar systems and flight capabilities. And like what was the crew even doing at points A, B, and C when they had this sighting? I just can't believe that he was oblivious to all of that.
I mean, maybe he's just really good at partitioning, he doesn't mind cognitive dissonance at all. Maybe, I don't know.
And there's certainly everyone today in the disclosure movement is pretty much repeating the Kehoe dance, right? Like the template that he set out is still the one that is repeated today, almost verbatim, ad nauseum. And it's interesting how, even by 1956, when Ruppelt was writing his book on UFOs, he already was making note of the fact of these templates and how the burden of proof was not on the claimants, but had been shifted to the government. And he really, basically says that the name of the game is to throw your claims out there and to challenge the government to disprove you, knowing full well that the government's not going to do that and that they typically aren't going to comment on the claims of private citizens. The balloons are interesting, and even just the entire logical fallacy of the authority, argument of authority that just underlies so much of the topic. Kehoe was so fast to deny balloons, as most people are, seeing them as ridiculous explanations, although they look exactly like flying saucers from the ground, right? And we have plenty of instances where balloons have been mistaken as UFOs, provable instances, including instances with pilots where they've chased them down. The Mantell incident, of course, being the most famous one. But even Gordon Cooper, when he was on Coast to Coast one time, had recalled a story where he was going through astronaut training, and him and Neil Armstrong were flying back from one airfield to another to do some different types of training, and they had come across the UFO, and they had tried to chase it down, and they were having some difficulty, and eventually they caught up to it, and to Gordon Cooper's surprise, it was a balloon that they were chasing down. And he said here, after years of ridiculing people about these balloons and saying it couldn't possibly be that, here I was chasing down a balloon. And if Gordon Cooper and Neil Armstrong hadn't have caught up to that balloon, if it had gotten too high to catch up to or too far away, that would have been another credible sighting by credible people of UFOs.
Famous
unsolved.
story. Yeah, it'd be another famous story. Yeah.
Yeah, and Erner Liddell, he outlines this fact, in his article. He says, if you can't, I don't remember exactly what he says, but he's like saying, if you don't know the size of the object or the distance of the object because you're viewing it over the ocean or above the horizon. There's no way that you can estimate the speed that it's traveling at. And Jeff's talked about this extensively too in some of his presentations, like because there's parallax effects that come into play where if you're moving in a certain relationship to an object that's stationary or nearly stationary, it can appear to be behaving in really weird ways as you are navigating around. It can appear to zip off or like move rapidly toward you or pace you, when it's not actually doing any of those things.
Yeah, and a bird that's at telephone pole height looks like it went miles across the sky at hundreds of miles an hour if you misinterpret it. I had that happen once. Long story short, I'm nighttime bird, its belly illuminated. It looked like a saucer skipping across the sky. At the last second before it left the field of light, I could make out it was a bird. Or like Steve's saying, there would have been hey, I had a UFO sighting story. And what it really made me think about was I saw a saucer because I spent so much time looking at pictures of flying saucers. If I spent my time looking at pictures of what birds look like at night, I'd have thought it was a bird flying. Yeah.
And like I was saying before, like a lot of these guys, Donald Kehoe was probably aware of the Fugo attacks when they happened. I'm sure Roscoe Hillenkoetter was, and some of these other guys were as well. And as Jeffrey Kay argued, like there was it's very likely that the U.S. suppressed information about germ warfare in association with the Fugo attacks, even though there were like outbreaks caused by some of these balloon crashes, and so yeah, when I was reading this chapter, it gets so messy because you can tell that there's a lot going on under the surface. There has to be.
Yeah.
In that K article, see, you had something much more interesting than what I had anyway. And I'm going to be talking further about it because that Jeffrey K. Fugo balloon article, it really interested me because the documents he was working with only came up because they were in a batch of UFO documents, even though they had no relationship to UFOs. But I think it's telling that it accidentally popped into a batch of UFO documents.
Yeah, because that's the thing is that the Fugo balloon sightings, they weren't, well, anyway, I don't want to end up rambling forever, but thank you.
Thank you. Thanks y'all for sharing that. If one of you, before we adjourn tonight, will put a link to that Jeffrey K. article in chat, I'll be sure and include it in the video description too.
Okay, it bears reiterating, Zeichel's version of the dissolution of NICAP provides a basic account of what many feel happened to the group. I am not citing it for the purpose of particularly supporting or challenging his personal assertions, but to offer as written summary the views of those who indeed feel the organization was dismantled by the CIA. The deepest betrayal, Zechel continued, took place when Bryan led a successful charge to remove Kehoe from his position as director. In the wake of the hotly contested Condon report released in January 1969, the other shoe seemed to drop. On December 3, 1969, when Kehoe was reduced to occupying a seat on the Board of Governors. He was accused of organizational mismanagement, particularly concerning perpetual NICAP financial problems. Zechel rejected the explanations offered, asserting Kehoe was actually removed as means to pull his speaker platform from under him. Zechel suggested this was done to destabilize NICAP and minimize Kehoe's ability to challenge the Condon report. Kehoe's removal coincided with the discharge of Assistant Director Gordon Lohr. He was cashiered, notified by telegram of his dismissal, and locked out of his office with no notice or advanced discussion, according to the late NICAP researcher Richard Hall. Kehoe was soon replaced at director by Stuart Nixon, a NICAP staffer. John L. Acuff was elected president, and this began what is often referred to as the Acuff-Nixon era of NICAP. It would prove to be the beginning of the end, as the 1970s became a decade marred with dwindling public support and decreasing frequency of NICAP UFO investigations. More men associated with the CIA would become significantly involved in NICAP operations during this time period, notably including Harry C. Cooper, appointed to the Board of Governors in 1971, Alan Hall, who took over as president in 1978, and Charles Lombard, seated on the board when Alan Hall was elected president. Richard Hall wrote that NICAP organizers, Carvalho and Rochefort, each had past CIA connections. He asserted this in a 1994 paper posted on the NICAP website entitled "The Quest for the Truth About UFOs, A Personal Perspective on the Role of NICAP," in which Hall expressed several views about NICAP, its activities, and the intelligence community. Incidentally, in 2020, UFO Classified podcast host Erica Lukes aired clips of a recording she obtained of an interview longtime NICAP investigator Ann Druffel conducted with Richard Hall. During the interview, Hall suggested he address the issue of the intelligence community meddling with NICAP in a paper he wrote and recommended Druffel review. I confidently believe that paper to be the above referenced The Quest for the Truth About UFOs. Hall wrote in that paper that in 1971, with Bryan still on the Board of Governors, Harry Cooper was added to the board. Cooper, Hall asserted, had served in the CIA from its inception in 1947 until retirement in 1966, including service in the operations branch. He became special assistant to the deputy director for intelligence. Hall described Charles Lombard as an acknowledged former CIA employee and aide to the Senator Barry Goldwater. When Lombard arrived on the scene in October 1978 as a new board member, he was appointed, along with John Fisher, the head of American Security Council and the Communication Corporation of America, a conservative fundraising group. Lombard was eventually involved in negotiations resulting in the Kufost acquisition of NICAP. Goldwater, by the way, numbered among the high-profile NICAP supporters and even became a board member in the 1970s. The Arizona senator who secured the 1964 Republican presidential nomination before losing the election to incumbent President Lyndon Johnson went on to chair the Senate Intelligence Committee in the early 1980s. He was also credited with writing a letter on behalf of NICAP to encourage membership. Quote, "I and my colleagues on the board of NICAP think it is high time more independent research on UFOs was undertaken," unquote. The 4+ page Goldwater letter read. The document is not dated, but was probably composed in the mid-1970s. In December 1978, Alan Hall, a retired CIA employee, became president of NICAP. Hall, no relation, allegedly took the position as a post-retirement hobby, and he operated out of his home without access to files, answering the phone, and occasionally writing a letter. As of then, NICAP was all but dead, a hollow shell of its former self. Much of the general.
Thank you,
Yep.
Steve. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Any comments on just this? Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, so I find it interesting how a lot of these political politicians aid covert state operatives. Because of course, Joseph Bryan III was the secret aid covert CIA agent operative for he worked under Air Force Secretary Thomas Finletter. And that's kind of how he kind of was involved in the UFO all the way back to 1950. In 1950, Joseph Bryan III, supposedly his Office of Coordination and ex-Hollywood writers that worked for him were involved in putting out a story in the media that they finally figured out saucers were just secret U.S. weapons. In 1952, he attended with Finletter a secret meeting on briefing on UFOs by the Blue Book staff and whatnot, as the secret aide for Finletter. So, he was doing this topic, going way back when, starting out again as a covert CIA officer working as an aide for a politician, in that case, Finletter. And I find that kind of interesting. How many politicians now have secret covert CIA officers working as their aides underneath them?
Yeah, and like in the old timers' defense, as you look through researchers, I mean, the archivists and the FOIA guys, as you look through these documents, oftentimes they're like first released 2004, 2003, 1997. It's like, I think they did request material, and I think they did ask for it a lot of times. And that should give us some hints too about these current guys, Mellon, Elizondo. I mean, researchers in 2050 will be getting their documents, absolutely. And if you're in those circles, you're in those circles. And I appreciate you making that point, that's how this turned into a book, was me reading about this stuff. And there's all these accusations of people are CIA. And then I start trying to dig into, well, how much of it can I actually substantiate? And enough. And so then it's like, yeah, the fact they're there means something. Never mind who's blaming who for what, or whether they're as a matter of convenience, they're saying Joseph Bryan on the board is proof there's extraterrestrials. That's just one end of the spectrum. But yeah, the fact they're even there, and that Lombard in Goldwater's office just kind of gives is kind of the path to C.B. Scott Jones became a congressional staffer, on down the line. And these guys like John Alexander that are CIA consultants that are really professional at whatever it is they do. It's hard to even say what they do, but they can sound really down to earth and grounded and give you some good systematic research and show their notes. And here's ABCD, and then come out of left field with, we got a guy in Central America that floats 3 feet off the ground after he eats ayahuasca. And you're like, okay, I don't know what we're doing, Colonel. I don't even know why we're talking. What are we even doing? And I'm not being facetious. I don't know what they're doing because they're professionals at it. If you're just a blogger that's not steeped in 40 years of CIA culture, no, you're not going to know what they're doing.
I'm now using as a new, just a random conversation fact with people. If I hear the name Goldwater brought up, I'll now say, did you know that at one point he was on the board of NICAP? And they'll say, what is NICAP? And then there'll be a whole, conversational topic.
That's a really interesting disconnect too, between the fringe UFO community is they often only know Roscoe Hillenkoetter as a CIA director that was pro UFO. So they're cool with that. And they just leave out of the narrative that he green lighted Project Bluebird and started the whole behavioral modification research that became Artichoke and MK Ultra. We'll just skip right over that. And yeah, go ahead.
Well, I almost brought up MK Ultra because you're talking about John Alexander. And he, of course, famously said, some people got up in arms about that. But really, there was nothing but good trying to be done with that.
I think he used the baby and bathwater analogy. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, he's got some fun quotes in the Mini-Steric Goats specifically, where it's kind of like that meme from like Star Wars, where Anakin and Padme are talking, and he says like, MK Ultra, you shouldn't throw out the baby with the bathwater, but we shouldn't do it again, right? And he doesn't kind of give a satisfactory answer to that.
Right. Joseph Bryan is another one that people in the UFO field pretty much only know him as some CIA guy that was on the board of NICAP, which if you were more into CIA history and you did a book or a report on Joseph Bryan or Nicholas de Roquefort that we're going to be getting into, you may not even get into their UFO activity because there was so much other more significant things they did. And yeah, Sharon, that's an interesting part of it. People that are well read on Goldwater and Hillenkoetter may very well not know that they were with NICAP, who would know much more about them than I would. Yeah.
I think back to a conversation that I had with, it was someone that we were just, kind of just getting to know you kind of questions. It was before a class we were taking, and he 70-something-year-old guy, and he was like, yeah, I had a Goldwater bumper sticker on my car, and that would have been the perfect point to go. But did you know? Fun fact.
I just want to say, obviously, Joseph Bryan III's the biggest accomplishment was his writing credit on the 1954 movie Animal Farm. Because Joseph Bryan III was actually a prolific writer and author. Like his grandfather was a newspaper guy, an industrialist, and owned newspapers. And I believe even Bryan like ran newspapers like when he was younger or whatnot. And so yeah, he's a big time author. He wrote a lot of books. He wrote children's books, and it's pretty interesting. I also point out Hillenkoetter, sometimes these people change their minds. By 1963, Hillenkoetter would write Donald Menzel that he pretty much wrapped up the whole flying and put to rest. There's no reason to believe they're from outer space anymore, and that Menzel basically debunked the whole thing. About a year after he left NICAP's board.
Yeah, the Menzel Hillenkoetter letters, I find those interesting too. It's trivial. One of my favorite parts is trivial, but that he was saying to Hillenkoetter in one of the letters, and I'm paraphrasing here, but Menzel's saying, I hear that Kehoe's on the verge of getting Congress to actually look into this UFO business. And he says something to the effect of, if you ask me, Congress should be looking into NICAP. And see there again, if you come at it from someone not steeped in the lore, I think Menzel was looking at You know, this guy is like telling intelligence officers to leak information. Like, that's what there should be a hearing about, director.
Right.
Did you want to share something, Rachel?
I just really wish that Hunter S. Thompson was was aware of this stuff, you know, so that he could have done like a Fear and Loathing in NICAP or something. Which he wouldn't have been able to infiltrate NICAP, I don't think, but he could have at least crashed a bunch of their events.
100%, or Tom Wolfe, like he did with the electric Kool-Aid acid test.
Absolutely, yeah, that would be, yeah.
One of
That would
my
be great.
so I went to the library. This was years ago, and I'm in the travel section. This was pre-internet, and someone had filed Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas in the travel section. And tell the librarian, this, I mean, it's a trap. They go on a trip, but it's not really a travel book. And she was like, well, it's about Las Vegas. It's sure that. And I was like, okay.
Find out where to go, exactly where to go to see the American dream die.
Right.
I would argue it's a travel book.
Well, that's true.
I at one point actually tried to buy a convertible with a bunch of friends so we could basically relive the book, you know, and drive around and go on an adventure. There may have even been a suitcase involved that we kept in the back, but yeah, it's a travel book.
It is okay. I reconsider my position.
Hey, Jeff, would you like to finish up the chapter for us, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
Much of the generalities of the NICAP story are verifiable. Much more is likely to be reasonably accurate, and even more is rather widely accepted, whatever it may all specifically indicate. An excerpt from the UFO cover-up by Lawrence Fawcett and Barry J. Greenwood, and posted in 1997 at the UFO Updates list, states, further evidence of CIA influence in NICAP developed during the period immediately before NICAP's decline. On December 3rd, 1969, Donald Keyhoe was ousted as NICAP's director during a board meeting. Who led the effort to remove Keyhoe? The chairman of the board, Colonel Joseph Bryan, former chief of the CIA Psychological Warfare Staff, 1947 to 1953. And who replaced Keyhoe? John Cuff, who was head of the Society for Photographic Scientists and Engineers, SPSC, a frequent target of Russian spying attempts, and a group that had many members involved in Defense Department intelligence units, including the CIA. His management of NICAP financially tight in the chiefs and totally inept in the research sense. Criticisms of government UFO policy were gone, and NICAP merely served as a sighting collection center. ACAF's management drove loyal NICAP board members away and ultimately led to ACAF's downfall in 1978. And who replaced ACAF? None other than Alan Hall, a retired CIA employee who accepted the position after a number of other CIA employees were offered the job. Support for Hall from the NICAP board came from Charles Lombard, an aide to Senator Goldwater and former CIA covert employee. Fawcett and Greenwood further wrote, there certainly seems to be a pattern behind NICAP's destruction. Is it coincidence that so many ex-CIA people became deeply involved in the operation of NICAP? Is it possible that the CIA wanted to influence NICAP activities for several reasons? 1, to gather intelligence through NICAP's investigator network. 2, to identify and plug leaks from government sources. NICAP was renowned for receiving military-oriented reports. 3, to monitor other hostile intelligence agencies. NICAP received several overtures from the Soviet KGB. There are a lot of different ideas about all of this, even among those who were there and or studied it closely. Hall suspect in NICAP was a deliberate master plan. However, he continued, I cannot prove this. Speculate on it. There were a number of ex-CIA hierarchy of NICAP, Barry Greenwood explained by email. The question has always been, did they exert due influence on the head of it as a group? Thinking back, the golden opportunity to finish NICAP was after the Condon Report, which preceded a precipitous decline in public interest for several years. NICAP finances were never that good, but this was exacerbated by Kehoe's money management, which was awful. Aside from the membership income, there was consistent pleading for money. The NICAP board could have said the Condon report poisoned the UFO topic, and they couldn't continue the battle against secrecy with such a poor business climate. But they continued on for another 10 years, and there was sometimes good case reporting in that time. The hierarchy was more concerned about administration than networking with members, especially the subcommittees, which was the bread and butter of casework. I do remember the members feeling alienated in the early 70s by this less than friendly attitude. The subcommittees folded and swarmed to burgeoning groups like the Midwest UFO Network, further aggravating NICAP finances. Was this a deliberate action? Maybe, but one cannot document that with an order from the CIA to mismanage NICAP into oblivion. It is as Dick Hall said. Jan Aldrich, an early NICAP supporter and longtime archivist of UFO history, provided comments by email. He suggested UFO researchers often tried to mold the NICAP story what they wanted to be to Aldrich did. To the best of my knowledge, never visited. The CIA officially visited NICAP once. They had Hall clearance, which was never granted. Don Berliner said two characters which he thought were CIA visited NICAP and purchased copies of the UFO evidence and bombarded him with questions. Aldrich suggested most UFO researchers overlooked nuance. Kehoe, for instance, had medical issues, including military service-related. His family suffered from significant medical problems as well. This added to the reasons why Kehoe worked remotely. The NICAP office, Aldrich explained, consisted of minimal staff prior to the mid-1960s, at which time more paid employees were brought aboard. Up until that time, a couple staffers got paid first. Then Kehoe and his assistant took what was left for expenses. This is it for staff, Aldrich wrote. NICAP was not CIA North with a big detachment of spies, and Hill and Cotter running the place secretly. Aldrich continued. Hall got out the UFO evidence with the help of a volunteer college student and donations from a couple in Maryland and Delaware. He actually started getting the affiliate and subcommittee started. Kehoe may have helped with ideas, but most of this was Hall's work. Sometime around 63, 64, interest started to pick up, and they began to increase staff and equipment. Kehoe always had contacts with the government, so he got info others could not. It was what they did certainly seems to be correct. That study of NICAP into three general timeframes. The study of NICAP involvement would be organized in much the same way. First would be the forming of the organization in 1956 and the presence of Nicholas de Rochefort and company, pardon and pun. Then we have the Kehoe years, 1957 to late 1969, with the ongoing presence of board member Colonel Joseph Bryan III. This period included a lot of military brass in NICAP circles, which was rather inherent due to the nature of the manner community leaders and intelligence officers were solicited for support. Lastly, we have the post-Kehoe era, from 1970 to the CUFO's acquisition in the early 1980s. It was during this time that Stuart Nixon and John Acuff initially had the responsibility for the organization, and Harry Cooper, Alan Hall, and Charles Lombard became influential. Colonel J. Bryan, Aldrich wrote further, did not have almost magical powers because he had been in charge of CIA PSYOPs. He had been in the Pentagon, a pro-UFO voice. His family confirms he was very interested in UFOs. The attempt to blame Bryan and the CIA for NICAP woes is trying to cover up the silly financial situation started in 1957 and continued up until the mid-1960s. Kehoe operated freely, Aldrich suggested, with the board acting as no more than a rubber-stamped entity. About 1967 or so, some concerned employees tried to get the checkbook and finances away from Kehoe, informing the board of lax financial control and how he would and be accountable. NICAP was already reduced in size because of lost revenue, Aldrich asserts. The board met and demanded controls. That didn't happen. When they met again, they kicked Kehoe upstairs to the board and put Gordon Lohr on leave. Stuart Nixon was like the only one left. He became NICAP. Former NICAP Assistant Director Gordon Lohr had a somewhat different take, expressing concern about CIA malevolent intentions. He referred me to his book, Flying Saucers from Beyond Earth, A UFO Researcher's Odyssey, Chapter 19, titled The CIA Connection. Particularly addresses the issue. Lohr expressed his suspicions in the chapter that the Kehoe replacement Stuart Nixon, among others, may have been acting on behalf of the CIA. It didn't take me long to wonder if Nixon may have been sent there to recruit me for a possible CIA takeover of NICAP, Lore wrote in this book. I had heard from Dick Hall that 2 of the agency's operatives had visited NICAP office before I came on board, and spent several hours scrutinizing the sighting reports. I soon realized that Don Keogh himself may have opened the door for that eventuality by appointing Admiral Roscoe Hillenkotter, the first director of the CIA, chairman of the NICAP Board of Governors. The Admiral and Keogh had been friends since their days long ago as cadets at the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland. Other boards, including Colonel Joseph Bryan and CIA operatives, they were among the many contacts Keogh had with the Pentagon, intelligence agencies, and obtaining UFO reports that he could use in his books and at NICAP. I was also beginning to realize that this infiltration would serve them well, and they really had the goal of taking over control of the world's largest UFO organization. You may be wondering at this point, how many people in NICAP were not spooks? The agency was indeed adequately represented in leadership positions. You may also be wondering how directly all these alleged operatives can conclusively be linked to the agency. We will explore that in more depth as we proceed, but the short answer is pretty conclusively, at least for the most part. The positioning of the chess pieces and general points contained in the NICAP stories, as expressed by Hall and others, are reasonably accurate. The intentions behind the actions or what the CIA was doing are most at issue and subject to interpretation, as suggested by the wide range of perspectives held. Richard Hall provides us with yet more thoughts to ponder. He occasionally suggested, such as during the previously mentioned interview conducted by Ann Druffel, that it didn't really matter to him what the CIA was up to because it did not substantially change his research focus or activities. He suggested that there was nothing to hide, so he did not find any attention from the intelligence community to be overtly significant. Others expressed similar points of view, such as Jan Aldrich, when he inferred the CIA had no involvement in the day-to-day activities under Keogh's NICAP. Such a lack of involvement would, of course, minimize CIA influence on research published by the group. That often seems most relevant to those who feel the primary subject of NICAP's story is UFOs. To many, that seemed the logical thing to surmise, while others see a fascinating saga in which passionately held beliefs collide with the public, media, and intelligence community harboring multiple layers of agendas. The committee's intersection with the CIA is certainly among the prominent points to ponder. We need to look no further than the CIA itself to find confirmation of the agency's official interest in NICAP. As Aldrich and Lore each suggested, inquisitive CIA officers indeed paid a visit to NICAP and Richard Hall. It occurred in 1965, as demonstrated in a 2-page CIA memo carrying a NICAP subject line. Now seems a good time as any to mention the CIA is, of course, not a hive mind operation. Everyone who works there is not all on the same page with the same access to a full complement of information, any more than is the case in any organization. Officers dispatched to question Richard Hall did not necessarily know, for instance, that board member Colonel Bryan was an agency asset, or any number of similar such circumstances that may have been more heavily guarded. Part of the complexity of our story involves the likelihood intelligence professionals NICAP for a variety of different reasons. Those reasons possibly include a personal interest in UFOs, doing a favor for a friend or professional associate, acting in an official capacity, among others. What's more, CIA officers possibly dispatched on other assignments were not necessarily all working on the same operation. We may also consider that the CIA objectives varied from one director and decade to the next. There are a lot of possibilities, as the NICAP story spans some 25 years and multiple CIA divisions. Now that we're gaining a bit deeper acquaintance with some of these people, let's take an even closer look at them.
Thank you, and thanks to all who read. I appreciate it. Thoughts, comments?
I just want to say I'm glad I suggested that we alternate reading, and then I didn't have to do any of it myself.
I enjoyed the rest of you reading. I mean, I would have read if I was not busy, but I enjoyed it this way, Jack.
I was going to ask, would you like to stay with this format next week? And then we can kind of feel our way through when it feels right to pause and discuss and stuff.
I'd be up for that.
Yeah, I would too.
I like doing that.
I would say it's your rodeo, Mr. Brewer.
I have a question. What, does Clara John come back up at any point, or is she?
Clara John could have a whole book written on her. She doesn't come back up in this one because she didn't really have a lot to do with NICAP other than being credited with founding it. It is, I don't know why. Well, I kind of do. She was into, at least she was outwardly into esoterics and contactees. And Kehoe and Richard Hall were trying to create this facade of scientific research. I don't know how sincere any of them were about what they claimed to be interested in.
Yeah, it kind of feels almost like, you know, that a lot of these activities and relationships, like they could all just be choreographed ahead of time or something like that. I mean, not all of them. I think that would be improbable, but you know, a lot of them could very well be. Another thought that popped into my head is that like these different eras when leadership changes kind of reminds me of when in Community, like the TV show, they had the gas leak year when like the creator of the show like wasn't involved and it was just like other people running the show. So like was there like a gas leak year in NICAP? By the way, I don't think that joke was funny, but it's a good analogy.
I think there's segments like something was going on with Townsend Brown and Clara John and Morris Jessup and council services that we're going to be getting into. And everybody that got near the treasurer's job said, I don't want it, I resign. I don't know what was going, like the first three, they had 3 treasurers in 3 months. And I don't know what happened. But Morris Jessup and Townsend Brown that were involved in the original shady Philadelphia experiment scam somehow ended up at Clara John's farm wanting to meet the people in her saucer group. And that became NICAP. And somehow when that happened, Arnold Krugman and Donald Kehoe said, I need to be at these meetings. And I'm not really sure how all these people met. But yeah, it feels, the further you drill down through it, I'd agree, Rachel, the more choreographed it feels. Like the further you drill down, like sometimes just at a cursory level, you'll go, huh, that's weird, but maybe if I knew more about these people, it would make more sense. My experience was it becomes more conspiratorial the deeper you dig into it.
I just want to say, as somebody who works in accounting in my day job, if you have 3 treasurers resign saying that they don't want to touch it, there's something, you know, that's not a good sign.
No. I mean, when the director hits the bricks at the first membership meeting, that's, and they all agree to help him with a story. Like that was weird. Like instead of saying, look what this, like I can kind of understand the PR that you don't want to say, wow, right out of the gate, we made these mistakes. I can understand that. But I also feel like you must have looked complicit if you're going to agree with Brown's story that, oh, I was only here to organize it. Like I'm a specialist, that I was just pulling it together and I'm willfully turning it over to Kehoe now. It almost implies there's something going on with the people that enable the story, you know? And then it becomes Kehoe cleaned house and swept out all the CIA people that were, and see this, like the narrative I got, the feel I got over the years before I dug into this, from listening, you know, to people, from reading the occasional article or book, I got the idea, and I had people even state it this way to me during my research. The CIA was attracted to NICAP, so Kehoe cleaned them out. No, it looks like the CIA was NICAP and allowed Kehoe to appear to be running it, to me.
I have a question.
Sure, Randy.
Earlier in the chapter, you said something about, you know, in the 50s and 60s, most people didn't know the CIA affiliations of some of these board members. But then in the section Jeff just read, there was a quote in there that said, you know, after ACUP's downfall, a number of other CIA employees were offered the job. At that point in the late 70s, was it known that there was a bunch of CIA people around?
That was the narrative. Yeah, that Zechel, who the NSA guy that we were viewing earlier was trying to form a relationship with for reasons unknown. That was the going narrative. The way they kept the conspiracy going about aliens was, we're too close to the truth, and the CIA busted it up. And I don't know how much they could actually prove this stuff. Like if you go look at that NICAP paper that Hall did, he like lists the board members, and it was very helpful. Like, you know, the series of things, you know, hearing Erica's interview, and then, you know, Ann Druffel and Richard Hall, and then on the NICAP website, they still maintain a website, the archivists do. You can find old reports and old articles and stuff. And it was very helpful to look at Hall's article, and it gave me the board members of the different eras, and I could go try to research them. But these guys were notorious for just writing the name CIA PSYOPs specialist, the name longtime career CIA employee, the name, blah, blah, blah. And you can't tell if it's just rumor or what. Like, they are not good with, they weren't good with footnotes. There could be a lot of reasons for that. Sometimes they were, sometimes they weren't. Hall's paper was certainly helpful in giving me direction. But you just, Randy, you had this narrative mushroom clouding out of the 70s NICAP that became the end of it all in the 80s. That was the CIA shut it down. And even though they would say, I think Carvalho and DeRochefort were CIA, They didn't make the connection to council services. They didn't make the connection to Townsend Brown. I don't know if they were intentionally enabling the secret. I don't know if they think that that detracts from the UFO research. I don't know if they think it detracts from let's all put Kehoe on our shoulders and carry him around like some kind of disclosure hero. I don't know if they just didn't know it. I think a percentage of them didn't care because they want to read Richard Hall's UFO book. They don't care who worked where, that when they weren't investigating UFOs. But even as early as the 60s, Randy, I could find on newspaper.com, as Jeff mentioned, Bryan was a prolific writer. Like that's what he would be known for. He wrote books on famous international people. And sometimes you'll find the occasional article that'll say former Navy colonel or Army colonel, Navy captain or whatever, and CIA consultant Joseph Bryan will be doing the book for some. And you'll be like, well, wow, if Washington Post figured it out, it seems like people that call themselves researchers should have been able to. And I think some of them did, but did they put their heads in the sand or were they just not interested? Probably both. I don't know.
All right, thank you.
Good topic.
I did follow one of the footnotes in this chapter to the NICAP.org website, and it looks like a website that hasn't been updated in decades, but I was surprised to see it actually has been. There was something in there posted last year by a guy named Fran Ritchie, I think, some article, and then another update this year, unfortunately saying that Fran Ritchie had passed away. So I don't know if, I was just surprised that it's still being updated.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a guy and a lady, I believe, that are working right now, updating some of one of the cool features of the website is their chronology list of cases. So you can go like a year and then just look at a whole bunch of cases by, that year by date. And those are still kind of being updated, I guess, apparently. So it's still a good resource, even though NICAP's been defunct for, decades, basically. Okay. It's still an excellent resource to use. I was just going to say, I'd argue that NICAP actually did some of their better work in the 70s during, the Acuff Nixon years than they did earlier, because they got rid of a lot of, like I said, they got rid of the whole, the constantly harping on the government, cover-up angle, and just started focusing more on cases, and did, I think, some decent casework in the 70s.
That could very well be. Yeah, Barry seemed to think so. Yeah.
Something else I wanted to point out is that I think if you have a citizen science organization, and even if it wasn't founded by members of the intelligence community or whatever, but it got infiltrated by them for whatever reason, I mean, the citizen science isn't going to win out against that. Even the CIA could just accidentally just fumble the whole thing and screw up the whole organization just without even intending to,
Yeah, have you guys ever seen that Woody Allen movie where they open the cookie shop to rob the bank? And the cookies are really popular, and they open this shop to dig a tunnel into the bank next door in New York. And their front is that it's a cookie shop, and the cookies are really popular, and there's 1 million people in the cookie shop all day, every day. I wondered, Rachel, what if NICAP was supposed to just be like a nonprofit cutout that nobody paid any attention to that we used to funnel funds to Georgetown and Stanford. And some loon came in that got Mike Wallace to interview him, and he goes on to tell the truth. And like everybody in the nation's wanting to sign up and get, and they're like, what the hell? Like, yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's no telling what like, well, we'll shelve that one and maybe come back to it in the late 60s or something. Yeah.
Be very funny if that's what happened.
I definitely think that the objective changed multiple times as we went from Alan Dulles to other CIA directors. You know, I'm a stickler today and research that gets published today where they just, you know, the proverbial they or the CIA did this or the FBI did that. Well, people that work at the CIA and FBI have names, and they have divisions they work in, and they have offices they work in. And if there's truth to the stories, like there is with NICAP, you can find those offices and what was the charter of the office. Like if Joseph Bryan worked at the Office of Policy Coordination, a covert arm of the CIA and State Department, and he ran a psychological warfare division, what was his job? And you can find out things like that where the ambiguity of people that just say the CIA came and visited me and blah, blah, blah. Like, yeah, just red flags should be flying over stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I really like how you approach it in a very, you know, as, you know, seeing it as complexity. It's complex, it's nuanced, it's not a simple thing. And the thing is that there could be two different people working within a Pentagon org, and if they have different ideas of like, you know, if they have different political ideologies, for example, that might make them completely interpret the purpose of something like NICAP. You know, they could see it very differently, like even though they're working for the same organization. And so I can see why, you know, like these people, like who I think, you know, Richard Hall, Jan Aldridge, these folks, they seem to me to be like serious UFO and researchers and historians, but they have these different perspectives, and I think that that's part of it too. You know, like I could definitely see the people who are actually invested for intelligence purposes also seeing it very differently because they understand NICAP to be different things individually.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great point. And like Jeff was saying, that NICAP website can be a great resource. Something Richard Hall wrote that's on that website about the Condon Committee. He wrote about how he was giving Dr. Condon all these UFO reports. I'll back up a little and I'll summarize that. In the late 1960s, the Air Force commissioned a study of UFOs to be done at the University of Colorado, and a Dr. Condon was commissioned to lead it. And it since pretty much got accused of being part of the cover-up. It got accused of being out to debunk UFOs from the start, and it can be argued fairly effectively. But my point in this context, Richard Hall wrote that he gave Condon all these reports and that Condon pretty much just dismissed them out of hand and didn't pay any attention. And a person you'd think would have been big on the conspiracy story, Richard Hall, wrote that he said, I really don't agree that they were just out to get us. I just don't think Dr. Condon was interested in UFOs. It wasn't that he wanted to get rid of my reports. It just never crossed my mind that he might not even read them. Like he thought he'll argue this or he'll argue that. And then he said later, I thought, but I never factored, what if he just doesn't even care and doesn't even read it, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, Condon was kind of terrible. I wish that they didn't have him be in charge of that project because he really didn't care and he didn't do a good job at all, in my opinion. For the record, that's my stance on the Condon Committee.
That jives with what I've read. It seems like Condon really, well, was he a former Manhattan Project scientist? Is that why they brought him on?
Rings a bell, but I'm not sure.
I don't know. He sort of had some, I might be thinking of the Robertson panel. I don't know.
His people had ties across other committees. Yes, I remember that. Yeah.
But I do remember that Condon simply did not give a hoot one way or the other. So I think Hall's and Rachel's analysis is probably correct.
Thanks.
Anything else, guys? Well, thank you all very much for joining me. If you're watching on YouTube, we appreciate you as well and your attention. Visit us at expandingfrontiersresearch.org. You can also find our collections of videos and blog posts at our Patreon account. You'll find links in the video description, as well as links to the various papers and websites we have addressed tonight. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate it.